Try that again. It's time to begin. And tonight we're going to be talking about the place where the genealogies of the two kingdoms come together. If you had that handout that shows the kings of Israel and of Judah, you'll notice that those two lines come together right in the center. Makes it look kind of like a K. And that's the intersection that we're going to talk about tonight. The family relationships between the two kingdoms are so complex that it's really hard to tease them out. And so it's going to be my job tonight to try to tease them out and try to illustrate them in a way that you all can walk away from here and not be thoroughly confused. That's my goal. We'll see what actually happens, but that's what I'm going to try to do. And we have about 40 slides in about 45 minutes. So I'm really going to have to get on my horse in order to do this. But I think you'll find most of those slides helpful in trying to put everything into perspective. Let's begin by praying. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege of being together and studying your word. We pray, Father, that we will not only learn from it academically, but that we'll also learn from it practically, and that we'll take the things that we learn and take them out into the world, and to try to demonstrate your glory through the things that we learn. So with this great task in mind, we thank you for the privilege of being here, and we ask you to be with us in this study. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So it's hard to know whether to put Athaliah first or Ahaziah first, because Athaliah comes first in the lineage, being the older of the two, but Ahaziah was the first of the two to be the ruler. Our texts for this evening are 2 Kings chapters 11 and 12, and 2 Chronicles 22:10 through chapter 24. Now, I'm going to give some background on Athaliah that's going to sound a lot like I'm trampling all over what Sam did on Sunday. And the purpose is not because Sam didn't do a good job and I need to go over it. If we're going to have some background on Athaliah to know who she is, we're going to have to backtrack a little bit and talk about her heritage and talk about the connections between these two families. So that's what we'll do first. By the time we begin our lesson this evening, Ahab is dead. If you'll recall, he died on the very field that he stole from Naboth. His body was deposited there, and his son Ahaziah reigned in his stead. And Ahaziah had some sort of a malady in his feet. It was prophesied that he would not recover from that malady, and he didn't. So his brother Joram reigned in his stead. Now notice also over on the right-hand side that Jehoshaphat reigned at the same time Ahab did, and that Jehoshaphat had a son named Joram, the same as the name of the king in Judah, in Israel at the same time. So we got two Jorams reigning at the same time. That is not a coincidence. Joram also had a sister named Athaliah, and Athaliah is the key figure that we're going to be talking about this evening, the first of the two. So here's some background on Athaliah. She's the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, and of course Jezebel being the Phoenician Baal worshiper that strengthened Baal worship throughout the land of Israel. And now her daughter is going to be marrying the king of Judah. That's going to bring Baal worship heavily into Judah as well. Ironically, her name literally means Yahweh is exalted. Athaliah's name, Yahweh is exalted, which is a hoot. There was a close alliance, as you can see, between those two families. Jehoshaphat's son, Joram, shared a name with Ahab's heir apparent. So the two heirs apparent to the throne have the same name. This Joram was married to Ahab's daughter Athaliah to seal an alliance between the northern and southern kingdoms. And that alliance played an important function as far as they were concerned in warding off the attacks from the Syrians, who were very powerful and were accumulating vassal states under them. So this alliance continued into the reigns of their successors, both of the two Jorams. And so by the naming of the two sons, the same names, they're strengthening their alliance. And by the marriage of Athaliah and Joram, they're strengthening the alliance between the two nations. Apparently, they intend to have a very strong alliance. That's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of it. When Jehoshaphat died, his son Joram became king of Judah, elevating Athaliah to the status of queen, or we might say queen consort in today's language. She was queen by marriage. She was the son of Joram and Athaliah. The son of Joram and Athaliah, that is Ahaziah, was named after Athaliah's deceased brother. I'm going to show this to you. Okay? So, Ahaziah is named after this guy over here who's now dead, the guy who died from being lame in his feet. Now their son has the same name as Athaliah's brother. So again, they're trying to demonstrate the closeness between these two nations through all of these different namings and marriages, intermarriages. Joram walked in the ways of Ahab, his father-in-law, and Athaliah, his wife, by worshiping Baal. And that's recorded for us in 2 Kings chapter 8 and verse 18. So this is Joram of Judah. Now you'll notice I have stuck a little J in parentheses there. That means Joram of Judah to distinguish him from Jorah of Israel, which when I include his name, I'll put Joram with an I in parentheses. And that'll help us keep them straightened out which one we're talking about. The consequences of this alliance are as follows. First of all, Edom was lost as a vassal of Judah. Judah had controlled Edom for quite some time, and now Edom would become a rogue state and would become a thorn in the side of Judah. The Philistines that had been held at bay all of these years will now, along with the Arabs, attack Joram. And he would receive a letter from Elijah condemning his religious policies as a result of his connection with this family. His sons were killed by Arabians in 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 1, either Arabians or by mercenaries that were hired by the Arabians. It's hard to tell which, except for his youngest son, Ahaziah. All right, so I'm going to show this to you again. And then Joram dies from this horrible death that Sam described for us in the last lesson. So here we have it. Ahaziah's got brothers. Joram has other children besides Ahaziah, but Ahaziah is quite young at the time that those other brothers were killed by Arabs in this raid that took place against Judah. All right, so that leaves Ahaziah as king. Joram's dead from this ugly disease, and all of his brothers have been wiped out, and that leaves him as the only person to inherit the throne. The youngest of the brothers is now the king. Ahaziah ascends to the throne. Joram was succeeded by Ahaziah, the youngest son, and also the son of Athaliah, very important, the queen mother. And Ahaziah began to reign at age 22, so quite young when he takes the throne. His mother, Athaliah, and this is a quotation, was his counselor in doing wickedly. So you can imagine which way Ahaziah went and why. He had his mother telling him every move to make, and she was leading him down the path of Baal worship. So the alliance between the two nations continues. Ahaziah then, of Judah, forms a military alliance with Joram of Israel, his uncle. Okay, there's a intermarriage here. So now Joram over here in Israel is his uncle, and they're trying to form an alliance again to ward off an attack by Syria. The Lord did not favor this alliance. So who is really responsible for Judah's successes and failures? But the Lord God himself. But they think, the kings of Judah seem to think that if they form an alliance with Israel, that will be their source of protection. That's never been the case, and it's not the case now. A prophecy had already been issued concerning the house of Ahab. So you're making an alliance with a doomed nation. This nation is surely to fail because the Lord has already prophesied that the whole house of Ahab is going to fall, including Jezebel, who's still at this time alive. Elisha then is commissioned to anoint Jehu, and he's a noted military commander as king over Israel. So this is a military coup. Jehu is going to gather up his forces, and he's going to go wipe out the house of Ahab. All right? So at this point, Ahab, Ahaziah, Jehoshaphat, and Jehoram are all dead. Joram of Israel is still left, along with Athaliah, the queen mother, who is a widow. Ahaziah's brothers have all been killed. Boy, it's becoming slim pickings, isn't it, for who's going to be king next? So Joram and Ahaziah form this alliance, thinking that that's going to save them from Syria. So Jehu begins to slaughter Ahab's household. And it begins with Joram of Israel, the ruling king, Ahab's son, fulfilling the prophecy to Ahab. Then Ahaziah of Judah, visiting his uncle Joram at the time as he recouped from his battle injuries in Syria, is killed by Jehu. Then the princes, Ahaziah's sons, whom Jehu meets along the way, and his nephews, whom he met along the way. Now who's not among the princes of Ahaziah? Who's not there? There's one son who can't be there. Why? Because he's still a suckling babe back in the palace. He's not going to be out there roaming around with the princes who have gone to fight. So he's the one who is spared, and that's Joash. And of course, Joash has brothers and sisters. But Ahaziah, can you read that from back there? Yeah, that's brighter back here than it is up there. Ahaziah's brothers are all killed by Arabs. And Ahaziah is dead now. And Ahaziah's, that didn't show up that way on my computer, I promise you. Ahaziah's nephews were also killed by Jehu. So look at all the dead people around, and look who's left. We've got Athaliah left, and Joash, and Jezebel, who will be the next one to get snuffed out. Because Jehu's not done yet. Okay, the onslaught continues. There's a general purge of Ahab's descendants. And Jezebel, that's Joram of Israel's mother, Athaliah's mother, and Azariah of Judah's grandmother. So she's the queen grandmother. And the house of Ahaziah of Judah had no one able to rule the kingdom. 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 9. Everybody's gone except for just the one, and he's just an infant. So Ahaziah was buried for Jehoshaphat's sake, not because Ahaziah was such a great guy, but because the Lord intended to establish the throne of David, and because Jehoshaphat had been a good leader of Israel, Ahaziah, his son, was given a formal burial. All right, so here's everybody that's dead now and everybody who's still alive. We have Athaliah and Joash. And that's where today's lesson is supposed to begin, with Athaliah. So Athaliah begins her power grab to assure her throne. And we talk about Athaliah being Bloody Mary, about killing off all of the family members. But look, there are not that many family members left to kill. Most of them are already dead. Jehu had done most of that work for them. So Athaliah killed all of Judah's royal family. Now, what you don't see on that chart is that there were probably also some rival wives. There were wives other than, may have been one or more wives other than Athaliah who also would have had children. And there would have been a whole slew of cousins, and with all of the main actors dead, now those cousins would have the right to come forward and say, I think I'm supposed to be next in line for the throne. And so Athaliah is just settling all that, seizing authority for Baal and for the connection with her father's kingdom. And she's just killing off everybody who remains. There were apparently some grandsons that she did not kill, and we'll run across 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 7. So there's some question as to whether Athaliah ever intended to kill off any of her grandsons. But there were some people who sure thought that Joash's life was in danger, and that's why he was skirted off for protection. These sons of Athaliah looted the temple and gave the money to and used the temple implements to serve Baal. Did she intend to kill Joash or not? Or was this a huge oversight on her part? I mean, the main contender for the throne, Joash, the only surviving son of Ahaziah, is still alive. Did she just forget about him, or did she look for him and couldn't find him? What happened there? Well, we're not given the details about that. We just know that he was under protection. So Joash's life was preserved by this woman named Jehoshabeath, or in the book of Kings, Jehosheba. She's Ahaziah's sister explicitly, Ahaziah of Judah's sister, 2 Kings chapter 11, verse 2, and possibly through another wife of Joram. She may not have been Athaliah's daughter, you see. She may have come through another wife. And we'll set that up in a second. It makes for interesting thought about how this all came down. She also happens to be the wife of Jehoiada, the priest. So she's a representative of Yahweh. She's a representative of Jehovah. And we've got Athaliah on the other side of this, who is a representative of Baal. So this is really a fight between two gods more than it is so much a fight between two factions in a kingdom. Okay, so this woman, Jehosheba, stole away Joash along with his nurse and hid them in a bedroom. And then Joash remained hidden for 6 years in the house of God under the priest and his wife, Jehoiada the priest. So this woman shows up, the sister of Ahaziah, and it's possible, just possible, that she might be the sister or the daughter of Joram through a different wife. And you see how that would, see if I can make this thing work as a pointer. No, can't do it. But you can see that divides the household sort of down the middle, half working to serve Jehovah and the other half working to serve the Baals. Specifically the Baal of the Phoenicians. Very few living people left on this map, and those two, the people that are left, represent a faction. All right, so let's talk about the rule of Athaliah. She ruled in the traditions of her father, which of course was Baal worship. Jehoiada, the priest, then forms an alliance. He's got a plan to put the little boy on the throne. And so he gathers the movers and shakers in Judah. He gets together the military leaders, the heads of the households, and Levites from every city in Judah. Now, how can he pull this off? How can he get everybody to be loyal, all of these important people to be loyal to him? You know, it may be that Athaliah was not so well liked. It may be that she was not a nice lady and that people really didn't like the fact that she grabbed the power. It could be that they didn't really approve of her being the monarch after all. And that even though she managed to finagle it and managed to get a guard under her to support her, that the people who were the heads of Judah really never liked her. I'm going to guess by some things that are going to happen in just a minute, some things that we're going to be told in just a minute, that that's the case. So he put together this plan to crown Joash and kill Athaliah. And here's the way that story went. There's a detailed explanation of how all this went down in both Kings, 2 Kings, and in 2 Chronicles. And we don't have time to go through all the details of that tonight. But basically it involved 3 guards that were set up from among the guard that were put in 3 strategic locations to protect the young king. And, excuse me, they surrounded him with people that had the spears and shields of David. Okay, so they're making it very clear that this is the son of David that's on the throne, as opposed to Athaliah, who's the daughter of this pagan queen, right, of the north. So then they bring out the king. They very publicly set up Joash as king with all these people, all these important people around him. Athaliah hears about this. She comes down. She hears the commotion. She comes down and she sees him being crowned, and she, of all people, yells treason. Who's really committing treason when you've got a son of the king who can reign, and the mother, who was a foreigner, who comes in and takes over, and now she's the one yelling treason and runs into the temple. Why? Because, well, apparently in the temple you're not allowed to kill people, and everybody knows that. This is an old habit from way back in Israel's history. Anytime somebody knew they were going to die, they'd run in and grab a hold of the altar and the horns of the altar in the temple, and sometimes their life would be preserved. Not so with Athaliah. Turns out she doesn't have many friends in the temple. Go figure. Baal worshiper, no friends in the temple. They drag her out of there. They take her to the palace, take her in through the horse gate, and just across the threshold of the horse gate, apparently, is where she's put to death. 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 15. The upshot of all this, and listen, look at this verse carefully. So all the people of the land rejoiced. Yeah, she doesn't have a lot of friends. And the city was quiet after Athaliah had been put to death with the sword. So this city that had been in so much upheaval over the death of its rulers now finally has some peace. And who's at the helm? Well, a little boy under the tutelage of the high priest of Israel, Jehoiada. Okay. So what's Athaliah's legacy? She's the only woman to rule in either Judah or Israel throughout their entire history. Now remember, there was a judge named Deborah, but as far as kings are concerned, as far as kings and queens go, there were no queens, only kings. And Athaliah was the only one in either kingdom throughout their entire history. And she got it through usurpation. Now, this was not an uncommon. Mind you, Athaliah putting to death all of the rivals to the throne, this was a commonplace thing. So Athaliah wasn't doing something that was really unusual. It was just unusual who was doing it. On her demise, Joash, her grandson, returned Judah to exclusively worship Yahweh until the death of the priest Jehoiada. And that's a really important until, isn't it? Because after the death of Jehoiada, things are going to take a dramatic turn. Athaliah was also, for what it's worth, an ancestor of Jesus. Did you ever think about that? It's interesting who shows up in Jesus' ancestry. There's some interesting characters that show up there. Rahab the harlot, Ruth the Moabitess, Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, who was taken by David as a result of his adulteries, and Athaliah. Here's a thought question. Was Athaliah a legitimate ruler over the house of Judah? If so, why? And if not, why not? And speak in Athaliah's favor. Why should we consider her a legitimate ruler over Judah? Anybody want to speak in favor of Athaliah? She didn't have any friends here either, does she? Well, she was the queen mother, wasn't she? And when her son died, why not? Yeah, she slaughtered a bunch of people, but that was pretty common practice back those days. If somebody tried to establish their throne, they slaughtered all the people who were rivals to the throne. So one might, from that standpoint, argue that she was a legitimate ruler. And yet she wasn't a native, was she? And being a Baal worshiper from a religious standpoint, and from the standpoint of God looking down from heaven upon the situation and saying, is this right or wrong? And based on the prophecies that God had made, the promises that God had made to the household of David, that there would never fail a ruler from his household, one could argue that this was always against the will of God. It was never intended to be. Athaliah was a complete usurper. She should never have been established on the throne. And things were not right until Joash took his rightful place as the king. Anybody have anything they want to say right now before we move on to Joash's reign? Okay, yeah, she was from the wrong tribe. Yeah, she wasn't from a tribe, really. I mean, perhaps in as much as her father was, but okay. Sharon? Yeah. Yeah, Sharon's asking the question, and really it's no different than the question that we just asked, right? What's the definition of a legitimate ruler? If you look at it from a purely human standpoint, you might say that she has legitimacy as the queen mother, but from the standpoint of God, who had set the order of things and said this is the way it's supposed to be, all sons of David are supposed to be on the throne, then you would say, should she be ruler? No, she should not. So what makes a legitimate ruler? And I think your answer to that question what makes a legitimate ruler will decide whether you think Athaliah is a legitimate ruler or not. I think we're all going to come away from this and say at the end of the day, we're on God's side. And God, if God says she's not a legitimate ruler, then we're probably going to say she's not either. What else? Okay. All right. So he makes it, for those who at home who may not be able to hear, he makes a difference between a seizing authority, my words, and seizing power, which she actually did seize power, but did she ever really have authority? Well, if authority comes from God, she did not. Good point. Okay, let's talk about Joash then, about 837 to 800 BC. Now we're talking about Jehoiada, the priest, as Joash, because Joash is still just a little kid, takes the throne when he's 7 years old. What kind of decisions is he going to make, and what kind of authority is he going to be granted? No, Jehoiada is really in charge. And now you got a priest of Jehovah in charge. And so things are going to begin to make a steep turn from the days of Athaliah and Ahaziah. So Joash begins to reign at age 7, 2 Kings chapter 12 and verse 1. Jehoiada tore down the altar of Baal, killed the high priest of Baal, his rival, Jehoiada's rival, right? He's the high priest of Israel. He kills the high priest of Baal and set up a guard around the house of the Lord and reestablished temple worship as it was in the days of David, it says. He established Joash as king on the throne in 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verses 16 to 21. So as Joash comes of age, he makes sure that Joash is firmly established as king. He doesn't want to be king forever. He thinks Joash is the rightful king. He wants him to be king, and he puts him there, and he makes sure all the people know that he's there. He procured 2 wives for Joash. Interesting move. He wants Joash to have lots of offspring. So there, right now, as I say, it's pretty slim pickings. Who's going to be the next king? We want Joash to have lots of options. When he checks out, we want somebody else to be able to check in behind him. Okay, so but through all that, and even with the high priest serving essentially as king here, the high places still were not taken away. Those persistent high places just have been the plague of Israel and Judah now throughout their entire history. People seem to like that icon, whether it's worshiping Jehovah through icons or whether it's worshiping some other god. They seem to love those high places. They are very persistent. And now I say it's no longer Jehoiada, it's Joash's Joash. And the reason I say that is because Joash authorizes this collection for the repair of the temple. But by year 23, no repairs have been made. That's a long time to be collecting money and not doing anything with it. Where's the money going? And so, pardon? Well, there is this hint later in 2 Chronicles 24 that perhaps the grandchildren of Athaliah are still alive, and they're pilfering the temple and taking the stuff out of the temple to use for Baal worship and to support Athaliah while she's still living. So there could have been some of that pilfering going on, but you also got to wonder about the priests. I mean, if they're supposed to be in charge of the money, do they not know that the money is coming up short? And so are the priests making use of it for something else besides repairing the temple, or what? We don't really know. That the details are never given to us. So Jehoiada then stops the collection, but he still doesn't make any repairs. I don't know, maybe the money's just completely gone. Maybe there's none of it left. And so Jehoiada sets up a collection box, apparently much like the ones we have out here in the foyer. It's got a hole drilled in the top of it, and anybody who wants to put money, it's a free will offering. Anybody that wants to put money in it can. And the money then no longer goes to the priests. It goes straight to the secretary of the king, and then the king's secretary gives it directly to the workers. So there's no stopping the work from being done now. There's no middleman taking the lion's share of the money. So apparently, Jehoiada is now called on the carpet in front of Joash, the king, and that's why you know that now Joash is really acting as king. He's really come to his own now and has taken charge of the matters. At this point, it says that they did not make implements for the temple from this offering in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 13. But then in 2 Chronicles in 24 and 14, apparently they came back later and made them from the leftovers of the offering. And that's worth mentioning, perhaps, because usually you think of the implements of the temple, the holy things, being from the first fruits of the money that's collected, not from the leftovers. So there may be a hint there that things are not still as they ought to be with regards to the use of the funds. All right, and then we have the death of Jehoiada, who died at the age of 130. And was so well loved by the people of Judah that he was buried among the kings, a rare privilege for a high priest. So Joash took the advice of the tribal princes after Jehoiada died to abandon the house of the Lord in favor of idols and the Asherim. Now that's really taking good advice, isn't it? So we're not serving the Baals anymore unless he's among the idols that are mentioned, but now the Asherim that have also plagued Israel, mostly the northern tribes from the time of the inception of that country, and now deep into Judah to the point where the king is neglecting the house of Jehovah in its favor. And of course, this incurs wrath from God. And there were prophets that were sent to Joash, but the leaders of the people and Joash did not heed the prophets. I said Joash hits rock bottom here because I don't think it gets any lower than Jehoiada's son, Zechariah, coming to him and warning him that Jehovah was unhappy with him by prophecy, prophesied against him. And this is Joash's first cousin, if you work through it, right? Joash's how did that work? Ahaziah. Okay, so the wife of the high priest was Joram's daughter. Okay, the wife of the high priest was Joram's daughter, which made her Ahaziah's sister. And so Joash, being Ahaziah's son, would have had this child, Zechariah, as a first cousin. Do you follow any of that? I should have made an illustration of that one. That's too tough. Okay, but anyway, Joash's first cousin is prophesying against him. And so what does Joash do? Puts him to death, oversees his murder in the temple court. That's what I call hitting rock bottom. You can't get any lower than that. You can't stand a prophecy against you from your own cousin, so you have him put him to death publicly in the temple. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown to him, but killed his son, and when he was dying, said, "May the Lord see and avenge." I hope that stuck in Joash's craw for a long time. Joash used the sacred things from the temple that were eventually made to pay off Hazael of Syria to prevent being attacked. So now Judah is again a vassal state of Syria. That which they had worked so hard through their alliance to try to prevent, through the very alliance that they tried to prevent it through, the intermarriages with the Baal worshipers, they end up becoming a vassal to the nation that they were trying to avoid becoming a vassal of. All that to say this: don't align yourself with all these allegiances that you think are going to make you stronger. Align yourself with God and He'll take care of you. But if you don't align yourself with God, all of the alliances in the world that you can form will not help you. They'll make you end up in the very place that you're trying to avoid. So, as a result of Joash's unrighteousness, a few Syrians came down and made war with Joash, and although he had a great army, he failed. The princes of the people were destroyed and despoiled by the Syrians. These princes that encouraged him to go against, to neglect the house of the Lord and establish the Asherah and the idol worship in the land. These are the peoples whose houses were pilfered and who were destroyed as a result of the Syrian invasion. Joash himself was wounded in battle, and his own servants conspired and killed him. So now Joash doesn't have many friends in Judah. Because he's a son of David, in order to honor the lineage, he was buried in the city of David, but not in the tomb of the kings. They wouldn't honor him to that extent. The moral of the story: if you're brought up in a godly upbringing, don't leave it when you come of age. You may find yourself, as Gamaliel said, fighting against God. Does anyone have any comments or questions Now I'm done with my material. Yes, sir.
I just think for younger folks, this story is such a good example when trying to put a real world example in front of them. Because, I mean, on paper, Joash, early life, is one of the best kings in terms of not just reinstituting, I guess, the common law, but also digging for new things to bring out, such as like setting up the payments and reestablishing the temple. And so it seems so good until his spiritual mentor is gone. And so when we talk, just got done doing this in the high school class, talk about kind of setting up a foundation for yourself and your faith. It's really clear how much he was relying on Jehoiada. You don't realize that until he's gone.
Yeah.
And then outside influences take advantage and he falls for it. And as you said, we see how poorly it goes. But it's heartbreaking. Like the story of him dealing with his mentor and father figure's son in such a harsh way where Athaliah can't get killed in the temple of God. Here, things turn so quick. It's just such a sad story, but can be used as a really good example for younger Christians who are really trying to see the need of being your own person in your faith.
Okay. Great comment. And for those at home who didn't hear it, I won't try to repeat all of it, but the gist of it is that it makes for a really good and important story for young people to realize that their faith has to be their own. It was clear that Joash relied so heavily on his mentor, Jehoiada, that when Jehoiada was gone, he collapsed so quickly because he hadn't really become his own person with his own faith. He was carrying out the faith of his mentor. Excellent, excellent point. Anybody else? Okay. I cede the remainder of my time. If anyone has a final comment, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and finish a couple minutes early. Didn't count on finishing earlier tonight with all those slides I had to burn through, but we got through them. Thank you all.